All right. Good morning. It is Wednesday, the 23rd, and crazy times right now. I was just watching Kohlberger on the TV a little while ago. I mean, what do you say to something like that? That's just complete insanity. I always, get questions from people about, certain things. And I've had clients in the past that are really interesting. And I also have a lot of them repeating who are in the worlds of psychiatry. And, it's an interesting world, psychiatry, because first you have to become a medical doctor and then you study psychiatry. And of course, what is all that about? The mind, right? The mind. And what's fascinating to me is I've had a number of psychiatrists who are really at the top levels of states or prison boards, and they talk about possession. And this is an interesting topic, possession, isn't it? Because we're all possessed with what we believe. But this is an interesting phenomenon. I've talked a lot about this in the 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐞, where the auric field actually attracts to it what you resonate with, what you think all the time out of the third eye chakra. This gets into this whole genre of karmas and all these other things that are going on that you can see in Vedic astrology, which is pretty interesting. And, this relates to Kohlberger. I mean, what would possess someone to do that? And we see this. We see certain people are so locked into their perception of reality. That's why we really have to, analyze what we think. And, you watch all these parents getting up there and you know what the outcome is. It's never going to bring their children back, which is absolutely horrible. I can't imagine as a parent experiencing something like that. And I never want to imagine it. But it's interesting. And I bring this up because I've done clearings in the past where I've seen many times the disincarnate soul is so locked in, even on the astral world, to who they are and what they believe. And, this stuff is outside of the purview of reality. I mean, when you think about that, we call them ghosts, we call them disincarnate souls, etc. And this stuff is really powerful because it tells you that what you believe in this lifetime has a huge effect on what you attract. That's called the law of attraction. Many people may have heard of that one. And of course, Abraham Hicks popularized that, and many other people who think in a positive way talk about this stuff, and or self-help. And it's such an important thing to watch your thoughts and your mind. It's a very, very interesting thing. So I had what also precipitated that is I had an email come in from a lady, Mary, and she had a wonderful question, and she's been studying astrology for 40 years. And I'm actually reading it here right now. And she said she uses primarily tropical astrology, but she's recently moved into Vedic astrology. And of course, Vedic astrology is really sidereal astrology, but it's much more than that. It's called Jyotish, which means the science of the light of the soul. And you can actually see here on the screen, there's this white etheric energy that follows through the center of these bodies from death to rebirth, and of course, over and over again. And this is a topic that is very interesting to me because what I find is we are not our astrology. And I think the entire corpus of modern astrology's viewpoint from that might be questioned. And the reason why the astrology couldn't be us, it's a reflection of where the soul and its lower consciousness is. And, I brought up the diagram that I had worked on last time, which is really interesting. It's that 4-world tree of life. And it really talks about our descent down into this reality system. And that's a fascinating topic here. I'm going to put that up on the screen here in just a minute. I got to get my computer here to work. I call them computers, not computers. And because that's what they are. And long story short, it's of great interest to me because I think that's one of the really, truly skewed things that has happened to astrology ever, probably since I'd say 1800s. And that's a guesstimate on my part. But what really is interesting is the late 1600s was really kind of the end of what we call traditional astrology in the West. And, this whole vein came up from clearly Egypt, Greece, Chaldea. This whole, thing got kind of rediscovered by the Arabs, and they actually had a place called the House of Wisdom. It was a number of different translators. And that was all kind of seized by the kings and queens and brought up through the Middle Ages. Well, not to get into a history lesson, what's interesting about this is it seemed to be the Industrial Revolution, which of course started right in the middle 1700s, according to astrology. It was actually about 1702 is one point where we had a Saturn Jupiter conjunction. Anyways, astrology really lost it. I think the religious, iron fist, made it the work of the devil, right? And what's interesting about India and the older cultures like that is that didn't happen. They maintained where they were, even though they got industrialized too. The whole world did, right? But if you start sifting back into this, you find the astrology is a reflection of the soul. So it's the other way around. We're not our astrology. The astrology is us. So it's literally, we seem to be tied into the body at first breath. I always tell that story about how they say an angelic or being or an angel attaches the spirit, psyche, and soul to the embryo at conception, not at birth, at conception. And the period of gestation, we're in the womb. And then, of course, we exit the womb. And at first breath, the spirit, psyche, and soul is tied to the body. Now enters astrology. The astrology that most astrologers use is the birth chart. Well, what is that? That's right when you were born, right? The imprint of the celestial influences right when you were born. So what's so fascinating about this is how could it? Think about that logically. How could we be that? It's a reflection of the soul. So going back to all this other stuff, and this lady brought this up in this, Mary Dodd, it was really a good point. She said, we take our birth chart with us when we exit the body. Well, there again, I'd like to clarify, I don't think we're taking our birth chart. I think what was there, which is the soul's innate traits, belief systems, and the lower conscious mind's elementals, also called our habits and thoughts and impressions, is what we take with us. And that is what causes the incarnation to the parents, to the situations and where we're at in whatever culture we're born into. That to me sounds a lot more plausible. I'm going to share my screen because I want to go a little bit deeper into this. And, I was going to get into the current energies, which I'll talk about in a minute. But this really caught my eye when I got this email. And I thought, wow, that's such a great thing, because really what I believe is this: God created time so everything wouldn't happen at once. That's my personal opinion. And time and space is where spirit manifests into the physical world. And you think about that. It's absolutely stunning when you look at how nothing, no person, no animal, no plant is ever the same. And, look at DNA alone. DNA proves the probability of duplicating the exact DNA almost infinite. And I don't know if it is infinite, but I know it's exceedingly high in terms of improbabilities of something being like your fingerprint. No person has the same fingerprint. I used to do voice print analysis in courts for forensics and acoustical analysis. You'll never get a room to respond the same way. You will never get a person's voice to be the same way. Everyone's voice is uniquely different. It's like your fingerprint. Just like the soul is uniquely different. You'll never get the same soul. You can have fragments of it. But this is where I think the ancient astrology shines a light on the inadequacies of the viewpoints of modern astrology. Everybody runs around saying, oh, I'm an Aries, I'm a Pisces. No, you're not. You're a soul having a physical experience. You couldn't be the sun in a certain sign in the zodiac. That's ludicrous when you think about it. How could you be the sun's position in the zodiac? You're not. You're far, far, far more than that. And here, I'm going to share my screen. and go back to this diagram, even though this diagram could never begin to really show the capabilities of how complex creation and divinity is, it's an interesting way for us to wrap our conscious minds around it. I'm going to share this again. Let me get this fired up here. So I'm going to share my screen and I'll show you this here. So let me see if I can get this all to work here. There we go. So if I go over here, back to this is, yeah, that's the diagram. So let me get my little pen tool up here. And this is kind of small on the screen, but we can zoom in. Again, I always say, whatever your opinion of divinity, God, whatever forces in the sky is, it certainly seems to be above creation. And the theory is that souls are created way up here. This is way above astrology. This is known as an Aramaic Hebrew word called absolute, which means the upper divinity of the creations of souls. And again, it might be also likened to, let me see if I can get this thing to work. Yeah, zoom in. You can see the divinity of the soul roots, or the return of purified souls. So this is really a very, very high and divine. Again, they say there could be 49 dimensions, 49 subdimensions. The next worlds down, Braya, is where the waters get more dense. And they say this is where the wisdom of the souls gets remembered from past lives. And again, no one can prove or disprove this stuff. But I put this together from a number of documents, just trying to, simplify this into a way to just talk about it. And so, anybody out there who says, oh, it's not perfect. Well, I know it's not perfect, but it's a way to look at things. Well, here's what's cool. As we move down, and I should say, they say there are vast spiritual realms. Some of the Buddhist documents and Vedic documents actually talk about this, where literally they say this is the Atma Bodha refers to it in some senses, but it's the enlightenment. There's many societies who've talked about these upper worlds. Well, the one that I think is most applicable here is the Yetziradic world. And I mentioned many times, there's a text called the Sefer Yetzirah. And it's been translated many different ways. The best one is the one by Ari Kaplan, if anybody wants to read it. But it's basically looking at the elements of time and space. And I don't think it's just Earth's time and space. I mean, quantum physicists will tell us that there may be multiple dimensions and other worlds within this dimension. Of course, they say there's 49 parallel universes and 49 subdimensions. Now, again, I can't balance my checkbook, let alone figure that one out. But notice, this is also the worlds of Binya. And what does that mean? Well, this is where matter begins to coalesce for the embodiment of spirit in all different kinds of forms, human form, animal form, even, yes, other extraterrestrial type forms, if you will. The plant kingdom, the mineral kingdom. And what's interesting is they actually say that these are all ensouled with life, because life itself or existence has to have some spiritual energy to maintain it. I mean, think about it. It's all molecules and atoms, right? So what's interesting is this is the realms of astrology down here. So what's interesting about astrology, I always say, forget Trinity, Neo, and Morpheus. This is truly the matrix of creation, not just us, but creation. And of course, the next worlds down is the Asiatic worlds, or people will call it the worlds of Asea, which is the astral worlds, the worlds of spirit. That's actually in between the material and the physical. So it's really quite interesting, or you could say the celestial and the physical. And then the last lower material world is where time and space is. And they actually say we are attached to mom's womb. When the umbilical cord is cut, the first breath is believed to be the imprint of the astrology. And of course, the exact longitude and latitude and placement you are is the eastern horizon that astrologers call the Lagna or ascendant, right? It's your rising sign. Everybody knows that. So, or people studying it certainly do. So what's interesting is taking that in a sidereal sense, I find puts you into the realms of the sidereal fixed stars, which are also believed to be angelic forces. So again, talk about a matrix. And, to the critics of Vedic astrology and to the critics of tropical astrology, I have found the ancient tropical astrologers were very knowledgeable about using the tropical zodiac juxtapositioned up against the sidereal fixed star points. So they were on it too. So it's just a matter of perspective. Everything's a viewpoint, so it's a matter of perspective. So long story short, when we exit the womb, they actually say there's actually Vedantic texts that talk about the amount of breaths you take is literally measured. And think about the amount of breaths that we take. It's some astronomical amount. I can't remember it off the top of my head. But breath is synonymous with spirit. Now, here's what's interesting. They say we're stuck on spin cycle here, reincarnating for whatever amount of times it is, and God only literally knows when that is. And I think we have a part in that. Again, that's where consciousness, our self-awareness, becomes a real part of when we escape from this realm, if you will. So this is really cool stuff. And again, notice if I zoom back out, one analogy that I'm using here, and I'm not claiming it's the perfect one, but the soul makes a descent down into the physical realms, plays in the physical realms, and not just on Earth. I mean, think about Earth is a very real place. And of course, our whole time base is based on the celestial mechanics of sunrise, noon, sunset, and midnight, right? No matter what type of earther you are, flat or round, doesn't matter. We still experience that every day. The bottom line is, when we leave here, they claim there are myriads of other realms, literally. And that is the mysteries of the serpent of time. And I always mention one of the most mysterious types of astrology to me is the Kala Chakra dosha system. And it's one I've really become enamored with. And I study amazingly interesting responses in people's lives and in my own. And I was not able to do that in readings before because I didn't have the computing power. So to answer this lady, I wanted to start with this today because I thought this was a great question. I love that when people send in questions because I'll certainly address them if I can. And this one was really good. Apparently she's a friend of Laura Lockwood. And what's interesting about this is, she brought up a great point. I don't think take our charts with us. We take our soul with us. And the soul seems to be the fabric which causes us to incarnate in time and space in these reality systems. And I think there's so many mysteries to the soul that we haven't even got a clue how amazing it is. And again, that's why I think many of the religions kind of steered people away from astrology only because they wanted to focus more on the spiritual element of who we are and the thought patterns of what we have. And I kind of agree with that. I actually really do. Because you can't look to astrology to tell you necessarily, why you're doing something. You have to look to yourself. But here's what's interesting about astrology. It can show you hidden traits that you may not know that you have. And I've had some really interesting experiences with people where I've literally been able to at least bring out traits and enhancements in their charts that show where a path might be more appropriate for them to pursue. Again, everything comes from desire. You can't tell anybody what to do. Everyone has free will. Even though we don't seem like we do sometimes, we do. So let me stop sharing the screen. But I really enjoy talking about this because, again, here's the Kala Chakra dosha. You can see this is not real high resolution, but you can see this grayed out area up here is the reverse zodiac based on the lunar mansions, which are sidereal around the earth. And below it, the non-gray area, white, if you will, is the direct zodiac. So this is a forward reversing time-space continuum that goes on for everybody. Some of us are born in this reverse system, or we may enter into it later in life. And these come in and out. And there's also sub periods that are amazing. And I have to say, this is really, really fascinating stuff. Yeah, somebody's saying here they just read Madame Blavatsky. Let's see, I just read Madame and sold. There are soulless individuals. Not sure I believe that. Yeah, I don't know that I buy that. You know, it's interesting. Do you know that Dr. Carl Wickland, if anybody buys the book, 30 Years Among the Dead, another psychiatrist who I greatly respect, I wish I could have met him. You know, he died in the 40s, I think, or the 50s. But anyhow, he was the psychiatrist I always tell the story about, who went from this staunch, hard left scientist, you know, became a medical doctor, then a psychiatrist, and then married a lady who was a psychic channel. And he started researching her to see if she was delusional, right? So, you know, the scientists, they take out their little pens and pad, you know, and they want to document everything, right? So he, to his amazement, found out that his wife took on a disincarnate soul who he was doing shock therapy on, and accused him of, you're the one shocking me with that lightning, right? And he said, well, what do you mean? And the person in his wife's body explained precisely everything that had happened. And he goes, my God, you had to have been there. And then they get into dialogue, and he finds out the guy had passed away. You got to read the book. It's amazing. Probably one of the most profound, I think, authentications of reincarnation you're ever going to find. This is a scientist, medical doctor, who went from, again, this linear left brain world to, oh my God, you know, people really don't die. And so it was interesting is he got the guy to realize that he was actually deceased. And then all of a sudden he changes his consciousness. And this is a disincarnate soul, meaning on the astral planes, and sees mom. Well, heck, I haven't seen mom in 45, 50 years, you know? So then he, quote unquote, goes off into the light. Read the Magus of Strobolos. He talks about this all the time, where people create these, what we call psychonoetic dimensions, which are parallel to what they experienced in life. This is, I believe, what traps us into reincarnation, is the inability to at least open your mind to this isn't all there is. You know, even though what we have here is very important. I mean, you're driving a car or doing machine, you better pay attention to this world, right? You can't walk into walls. Yet on the other hand, the openness to this is so much more important. And long story short, Dr. Carl Wickland spent the next 30 years literally documenting so many things. And why I brought him up is because Madame Blavatsky is in that book, 30 Years Among the Dead. She actually came back through Carl Wickland's wife and had said, you know, a lot of the things that I espoused may not have been totally accurate. And see, this is where we run into trouble. And that's why I'm really adamant about, I don't claim to know anything. I'm only here presenting evidence. You like it, great. You don't, hit the road. You know, I don't care. I'm not here telling anybody what to think, what to do, or what to believe, right? I don't know if I believe anything anymore. I'm more of an observer. And when I see something repeated that makes sense, you know, I'll treat it as a potential reality. You know, we all have to have some sense of stability and reality in what we believe. But I think an objective point of view with a little more critical thinking is sometimes healthy, don't you? So anyways, yeah, that was a great comment that someone had just made about Madame Blavatsky. You'll find this is the area of theosophy. If anybody doesn't know who Madame Blavatsky is, her and Ledbetter, Charles Ledbetter, which Charles wrote some good stuff. He was an English I think he was a pastor or a reverend or something who turned to the Vedantic materials, and they all trotted over to India and started getting all this information from different yogis and gurus and created the Theosophical Society. I think it was a Theosophical Society. And if I'm wrong, you know, whatever, you read the book, you know, it is. I read that stuff years ago. And I always had a little bit of a, yeah, there's a lot of truth here, but not totally. You know, So, and again, I could see the ego being mixed in there, and that's what we got to watch. Is the minute we start injecting our own opinions without basis, it's not a great thing. So it's something to be aware of. So, anyways, that was a good comment there. I like that. And someone saying my theory, the universe is not a positive thinking entity; it's a positive feeling entity. It mirrors our feelings, not our thoughts. Well, that's an interesting topic. Yeah, I mean, truly, it seems like, in my opinion, the universe is a reality machine where spirit gets concretized into time-space realms. And of course, this one is the Earth, right? And, it sounds a little esoteric to be talking about other realms and other planets, but I think they absolutely exist. There's some profound documents, both in the rabbinical texts and the Vedantic texts, the Chaldean and the Egyptian, that talk about these things. And of course, I think people are opening up much more to the quote unquote UAP phenomena, right? They always call it phenomena. Why is it phenomena? Why can't it just be UAP or, a craft, right? But anyways, phenomena, I guess, is a great word, I guess. But yeah, it's interesting stuff, because when we look at reality, I have seen, experienced literally very unusual events with, you call them UFOs, UAPs, phenomena, whatever you want to call them. I've had a motorcycle shut down in the 70s. Electricity was totally off. We saw a craft up there. And I've seen so many things, had missing time. And many people report this stuff. So we're in a reality structure that is clearly extremely dynamic. And, going back to Vedic astrology, I've often seen the forces on the eastern horizon, which astrologers call the ascendant, is often really, it's called the angel on the ascendant by some. Other people say, oh no, it's a fixed star. It really seems to mirror the guidance of that soul's journey. I know I looked at mine. It was amazing. I just went, wow, this is so accurate. It's exactly how I feel. And sometimes, when I do readings with people, I never, ever want to tell anybody what to do, how to do it, or anything else. I just present the information that allows that person to, grab it or not, because there's nothing more powerful in this universe, in my opinion, than human free will, or you could say desire. Desire is magic. In fact, the Magus Astrovolos talks about this a lot. He calls them desire elementals. Well, isn't that interesting? The third eye chakra, not the eyes, the third eye chakra, emits etheric energy we cannot see, measure, or touch, and it permeates the aura continuously. And what does that mean? Well, that's the fabric that I think sticks with us when we exit these physical bodies. And I also think these are the fabrics that tie us back into reincarnation, and also the karmic elementals. Now, that's a whole nother subject that's way deeper than just astrology. And there's where Jyotisha, or you could say Nadi, and Vedic astrology really do shine. Not that you can't see the same thing in tropical as well. It's just not focused on as much. Tropical astrology is more cycles and transits and timing, which is really good. But there's a karmic element, and I will defend the ancient tropical astrologers as well. They would talk about primary directions, which are, the Earth is a time machine. It literally is a time machine. You can literally advance your chart 1 degree per year in various types of what they call progressions. And you'll find the solar system is a matrix that plays out against your chart. But here's where astrology gets murky with the soul. It's different for everyone. And what's amazing about astrology is the timing of it is so accurate. It's creepy, but it's going to be different. I use the analogy of satellites. All the planets seem to act like multi-dimensional transmitters, meaning they're pass-through connected to something else. Well, what might that be? The soul root, you see? So there's more than just astrology. You have to connect the fact that, there's a spiritual essence here that's coming through, that's not measurable. But what's fascinating is how the aspects and the orbs of influence and the yogas and the timing frames are like literally programs are running for that particular soul. And now enters free will. You take a guy like Kohlberger who's sitting up there right now. What's he going to say? Well, I'm sorry for killing your kids. I mean, it's heinous what he did. And I mean, you look at so many other things that people do that are horrible. I mean, I hear all the time some parent killed their kid. I think some guy just got charged with drowning someone. I mean, where do you go with this? I mean, how can you even fathom someone having that kind of a consciousness? Well, there's evil. And now that gets into a lot of interesting stuff with astrology, and interrogation astrology can go a long ways to showing that stuff. They always show that possession. If I see the Lord of the 12th in a question attacking the Lord of the Ascendant or associated, there may be some type of possession. And what's interesting, you can tell by the severity or malefic or beneficness of the planet whether it's something really evil or just something that's elementals. This is deep, deep stuff, way, way beyond something we can touch in a short podcast like this, but very interesting stuff. And again, there's a lot of viewpoints to look at this. And I love talking to the psychiatrists. Like I have one friend and psychiatrist who was, he's like the head of the board of a state. And, he says, I can't bring this stuff up through, my normal channels of business, because I'll lose my license. But they absolutely believe that these individuals are possessed. There's no other words for it. And you take M. Scott Peck, who wrote the book, The Road Less Traveled, and also a great book, The People of the Lie, which, he basically set out in a psychiatric analysis technique to say, okay, does evil really exist? The answer he came back with is, yes, it does. So now you get into this matrix of free will. And I think that's so much bigger than we know, even though a lot of us feel like, we got the padded handcuffs on and we're all locked into our lives or jobs or whatever we're in, and we are. But that's an interesting thing, because that's where Vedic astrology has all these divisions of karmas, certain ones you've got to experience. Again, you can't change your body. Well, you can alter your body. People do it all the time, but not totally. You're not going to make yourself 6'4", if you're 5'3", or, 5'8", or whatever it is. I mean, whatever analogies you want to use, we have the basic confines. We're not going to change our parents, right? We're not going to change where we come from, our siblings, etc. You can walk away or do whatever you want, but you're locked into the reality structures, particularly when you're young. And these are the karmas we cannot change. What's interesting, and some people love their lives and where they're at. So it's really interesting how this is reflected in this matrix called Vedic astrology and the tropical systems. Absolutely blows my mind. I mean, you can see it. You can see when a parent, whether it's the mother or the father, they came or left or were devious or whatever, you can see a lot of stuff, angry, or talented mechanically. It's really interesting how that stuff can show up. Well, this cannot be the astrology creating this. You see, that's my whole point. It has to be something much, much higher, which is the soul. And again, I always love this little diagram that I show, which interestingly enough, precisely mirrors let me see if I can share this one more time. This is a diagram I often allude to quite frequently. And let's see if we can get that up here. But that is this one right here, which I believe is the next one. Yes, you will notice, if anybody has read the 𝐼𝐸𝐺𝐭, the lower conscious mind, which is our emotional perception of reality, which really forms. See, this is the lower mind, the lower self. Some people call it the seat of the Prada, but it's really, the moon is often referred to as our emotional perception of reality. And it's skewed by what they call the moon's north and south nodes, which is the movie we're playing. And then notice, if you come up here, you'll see the Rosh, or some people pronounce it Ruach, but I do hear it pronounced Rosh a lot. And Rosh just means spirit. See, Nefesh means the lower conscious perception of reality, which is very interesting, because AI is never going to be like you and I, because we emotionalize everything. And we do. We're emotionally responsive beings, and no matter how rational. And then notice, if we go up, this big thick dashed line is kind of the division, if you will, between what psychology might call conscious, subconscious mind. And notice right here, you got the Escape from Alcatraz planet, Saturn. Every astrologer will tell you, oh, Saturn's bad. No, it's not. Saturn is, you could say, the gatekeeper. Look at its glyph. It's the cross over the crescent of the moon. Well, the cross means previously concretized belief systems, also karmas that have maybe been created at a different incarnation. And I believe that's absolutely true, that are now releasing through our perception of reality called the moon in time. So, in fact, the Greeks called Saturn Kronos, the keeper of time. And then notice over here, this is a strange word called Haya, but it's actually translatable to another word in Aramaic and Hebrew called Chokmah, which means wisdom of the soul. And then you got the upper divinity. So isn't that interesting? Because if you jump back here, that's the four worlds. Look at this. If I zoom in, there's the nefesh, the lower conscious mind. There's the spirit in the astral worlds. There's the neshama, which is basically the celestial influences locking us back into our perceptions of reality. And then you've got Chokmah, which is the wisdom of the souls, remembrance of past lives, etc., where they could say super consciousness, total self-awareness comes in. And then last but not least, the upper divinity of the soul. And that parallels those four worlds. Quite interesting. I should say five worlds, actually, because that's the five layers of the soul. And this model, there's other ones, people will say, well, but there's a better one over here. Okay, there might be. But this is one that I have kind of picked that at least opens up a way of looking at an infinitely complex subject here that is more rational to grab a hold of. And what's interesting about the astrology is the astrology shows timing and really accurately. I mean, I was just with a friend last night and he's been having a really rough time. And he's like, what the heck's going on? I'm freaking out. I'm like, well, I said, buddy, you got Uranus squaring the moon. And he's also got Saturn in the eighth. It's never one thing. So that's the issue with astrology. It's never one thing. It's always multiple things, because none of us have one aspect happening in a vacuum. And you'll find the doshas here and the time lords, all that really, really interesting stuff. So anyways, and I also encourage people to look at the 𝐼𝐸𝐵𝐿. It actually talks how your soul, I shouldn't say your soul, but your physical body can actually have other lower consciousnesses come in on you, and they may share with you or guide you. So this gets into another type of possession, which is soul guides. A lot of people talk about walk-ins and different shifts and changes. We look at certain talented people and we wonder, how did they, get lucky at 20 years old or whatever, and create this incredible music, or, and then all of a sudden it goes away. Isn't that interesting? And this is shown by, various different cycles, which is pretty amazing. And I got to tell you, when you see exalted, well-aspected time lords come in called doshas, both in the Kala chakra and the Vedic, it's amazing how things light up. It's like, somebody just downloaded, Tank just downloaded a new program, and then Trinity could fly the helicopter, So it's not quite unlike that in some ways. Really interesting stuff. So anyways, a lot of comments here coming. I got to watch. I don't have a lot of time, and I just wanted to jump into that because, I love it when people send in these little questions. It gives me material to focus on. And I thought that was a great question, that, the observation of tropical versus sidereal, and also, do we take our charts with us when we exit the body known as death? I don't think it's the chart we're taking with us. I think we're taking with us the soul root imprint, or the amalgam of the conscious mind and the spirit's interaction, these three lower layers of the, again, conscious mind, spirit, and the neshama, which they would call the, again, where a lot of the interaction of karma stays and has to dissipate. And also consciousness can balance that. It's very complex. And I think that's what we take with us, which causes another reincarnation, if that happens, that's going to be commensurate with that level of change in consciousness or karmic dissipation. And, the big thing is in India, they talk about remedial measures, and one of them, gemstones. They talk about how gemstones can actually alter the aura. It's not going to get rid of your karma, but it can alter the vibration of the aura to balance you. And I do a lot of that with people. And I actually thought that was a scam too many years ago. But I have to say, natural gems are exceedingly powerful. And I've had a lot of people, it's not going to, you're not going to get lightning bolts and all your karma is going to go away. But what it does do is shift your energy so that you can maybe cope in a more rational way. So, and there was also mantras and prayers. Of course, we see this in the Western religion, right? The priest gets you in the booth and, you tell everything you did wrong, right? Confessions. Or, you go to the rabbi and they work on you and do what they call purification. So there's a lot of different things. And in many different religions, there's always been an attempt. The Hunas had some really interesting stuff too, which is very secret. Many cultures would try and find a way to recorrect. Psychology, therapy, all this stuff can, getting things out and just analyzing, enclosed, you could say damages that you've experienced from life or relationships or your childhood. Sometimes just talking about it, whether you go to a therapist or not, can really help. And all these things relate to how do we shift away from, some condition and evolve, right? It's called evolution. And it's interesting how the astrology can reflect these times in a very interesting way. And I've also seen people really go down the rabbit hole with challenging aspects. I've had a number of different parents who were, in challenging situations with their children. And they would say, geez, the psychiatrist wants to medicate them. And we don't want to do that. But what do you think? And I'm like, well, I can't tell you what to do medically, but I can tell you the astrology says this particular child had a certain aspect coming in. And if you wait to right here and support that child, maybe in a different way, not that I can recommend any therapies like that, but the parent can make the decision, right, with the doctors or whatever they want to do. And it's interesting. I had one parent, the father and the mother, elected not to medicate just based on their own opinion and free will, right? They have the right to do that. And when that aspect ended, the child cleared up. It went away. So, I'm not saying you can replace any types of therapies, but what it does give you is a different viewpoint at looking at timing. See, timing is everything. It's really interesting how these energies show up and they're so accurate, they're creepy. I've seen it in my own life. And sometimes I'm actually amazed at how powerful these celestial influences are releasing upon the soul. Pretty serious stuff. And for good and for ill and for good too. It's amazing. Amazing. I love showing people good stuff. Like when I see certain transits or progressions that are sometimes once in a lifetime. I mean, look at Donald Trump. He had Uranus transiting his midheaven along with Mars right when the bullets whizzed past his head. That'll never happen again, ever. Why? He's not going to be around another 84 to 86 years from now. That's how long it takes Uranus to go around. And I can guarantee you the Mars and the Uranus will never be at that position ever again at its midheaven. Now, it's not to say they won't attempt to kill him or whatever, but I can tell you, because believe me, they will. That guy, they really want to take out. The owners don't like him. And that's a whole nother topic we'll get into. But anyways, the long story short, we're all like that. Now, there are certain, I don't think you can ever get the same configurations twice. We're in a reality machine. And that's what's fascinating about the observation of astronomy tied to what astrologers call astrology, because that's really what it is. It truly is a science. It's a science of analyzing geometric aspects, which is stunning, absolutely stunning. It's pretty amazing. I always loved electronics and electricity. I did a lot of work in studios and designing and acoustical works. And science is very interesting in that whole area. I mean, look at the electronics around us. It's amazing what we have around us. The computers and everything else. Well, and look at your car. I mean, the average car today is so sophisticated with all the sensors and everything, almost drives itself, right? If you got a Tesla, it does. Anyways, long story short, what's interesting about all of this is that astrology is a science exactly like that when you have the tools to really analyze it. It's not just some airy fairy, you know, Pisces loves Aries. So anyways, a lot of good comments coming in here. And lot of people are saying a lot. Yeah, people are talking about their pets. You know, that's another thing too. I always tell that story about my dog when she died. I love that dog so much, and so many people love their pets a lot, right? I mean, you really get attached to them. How can you not? They're amazing. And I just said, I hope Shelby goes off into the light, you know. And she came around me, and another person, when she saw it, Ella saw it. She's like, "Oh my God, I see Shelby all around you." And then she left. I'm like, okay, you can't make this stuff up. And pretty well. So, and again, many people talk about their loved ones coming back or certain things. You know, again, this time-space continuum is wired to the five senses. Our brains are suppressed in the first 7 years of life. Hey, grow up, quit playing fantasy, do your work, right? Not that it isn't good to learn how to work, but I would tell you that, you know, we're suppressed on the opening towards the higher consciousness that we all have. And again, you know, it's an interesting thing to be aware of. So anyways, yeah, a lot of people are talking. This is why they call it emotional holographic light spectrum effects of fractals are just part of the performance. Yeah. I mean, this universe is stunning stuff. Stunning. It absolutely is. You know, I gave a talk at the IONS Institute of Noetic Sciences a long time ago, a couple of times, I think, about this. And, you know, Edgar Mitchell was the astronaut, of course, who started that. And some interesting talks there because, you know, again, this is that whole realm of who are we, what are we, and, you know, what are we doing here? And time, like I say, God created time, so everything wouldn't happen at once. So a lot of stuff here. So I can't stay long today because I have a session here I got to get to. But this was fun. And, you know, the only thing I'll say about the current energies right now is we do have a new moon that's going to come in. Always get in touch with the new moon. You know what I like to do? I always like to do a little meditation. You can light a candle, a little incense, do a meditation, or set goals. And it's interesting because when the sun, which is the portal to the upper heavens, like I showed in the diagram, and the moon, which is the crucible, join, it has a spiritual manifestation that's very, very powerful, you know, and beliefs not required. So we, again, have this new moon coming in on Friday. It's going to be Pacific time, 3:32 a.m. in the morning. So it's a little, you know, early to be up on the new moon. And there's different theories. Some people like to do it right on it. I find it's really powerful. If you have an astrology program, or you can just get a calendar, it tells you right on the internet. You can actually see right when the moon joins exactly. And there's quite an interesting and powerful energy. It's very subtle. It's like gemstones. Gemstones are the same way. Everybody's, you know, putting on a gemstone and expect, you know, lightning bolts to hit them. No, you just keep going with the gems over a period of 6 months to a year, and you'll really feel your aura starting to shift. It's the same thing with new moons. It's not connected directly to the five senses, but it's an etheric energy that's very, very powerful. And again, that's outside of the purview of the five senses, but cool stuff. So anyways, lots of people here. Sorry, I can't get to all the questions. A lot of people are coming in here saying, "What's up, Jeff? First time catching a live stream." Oh yeah, cool. So yeah, yeah, Ozzy Osbourne died. Yeah, you know, you got to give the guy credit. He did make some pretty interesting music. It was good. No doubt. I know when I was in the studio scene in Los Angeles, everybody wanted to work with him, you know, because he was really actually quite a good arranger of music, and quite interesting stuff. You know, music is such a powerful thing, and it really does move the soul in a lot of ways. So much great music that's been created out there in many different genres. So anyways, yeah, lots of great comments here. And again, I apologize. I can't get to them all. But yeah, yep, a lot of people are mentioning a lot of different topics here. And, you know, again, this is an interesting time because I think we're finding, and what I'm finding is the computing power is allowing us to make inroads into the analysis of these cycles of energy in astrology that are quite profound. And, you know, another great thing is a lot of information has been pouring in with translations and looking at different types of astrology. we're starting to demystify some of the weird stuff around astrology and look at it more like it is. It's looking at energy. It's no different than analyzing electrical circuit. I mean, it's going to perform how that circuit is designed. And it's interesting, what makes astrology so complex is you're going to get what the celestial influences are on you, but in your own unique, very special way that is commensurate with the imprint of your soul. And that's what my opinion is at this point in time. And again, I'm always evolving, and anybody who thinks they know everything about astrology or about the soul, good luck, because we're scratching the surface. I always again mention that one of my more favorite books is the Book of 𝐟𝐵𝐿, and Rabbi Maharil talked about that angel brought him, stuff on astrology books, and the ink would disappear as fast as he read it. And he asked why, and the angel said, because at this point in consciousness, the human race needs to go through what it goes through. So, karma and lessons are not easy. This is not an easy planet. But on the other hand, it's pretty divine when you look at it. I just found a monarch butterfly yesterday. Camille found it on the sidewalk, and I looked at it, and I couldn't believe the patterns in it. I should show that. But man, just look at the ways trees grow and people, their uniqueness. Everything on this planet is quite unique once you turn off the news and look at creation, right? So anyways, folks, you guys have a great rest of the week, and I will talk to you on Saturday. And again, I appreciate, if I get a ton of comments, I can't answer them all, but this one really stuck out. I really liked it, and that was a great thing that Mary had sent in. So again, thanks for listening, and we'll speak to you on Sunday. Okay, bye now.